for some of you. I mean, you've been here all along, and we've had a stimulating conversation while we weren't recording. So if you missed that or you weren't signed on, this is the reason that you should be here in person, or should join us for our future events, including our annual Alfred Korzybski Memorial Lecture, which will be in New York on October 7th, to be given by Jana Levin, who is the Columbia University astrophysicist, as well as a novelist, and to be followed by a symposium as well. But for those of you that are IGS members, this is a great membership benefit. If you're not a member, you should be, because you get free admission to the dinner and lecture and symposium. And if you can't make it, you get exclusive access to the live stream of the event. Plus you get other discounts on publications. We'll be offering courses, and as well on etc., the quarterly journal of the IGS, which in and of itself is more than worth the price of membership. And speaking of the journal, it's my pleasure to introduce the chair of the next session, who is the editor of etc., as well as a professor of communication at Manhattan College, Thom Gencarelli. Take it away, Thom.
Thank you, Lance, and welcome to our first panel of the afternoon, entitled The Meaning of Meaning, or as Neil Postman wrote as a head of one of his chapters, De-Meaning of Meaning, perhaps. We have 4 speakers. My job as chair, other than to make sure that all of these professional folks stay on time, is to get out of the way after my introductions. And so let me take it away by introducing the first speaker, who's Ricardo Meneses from Universidad Panamericana in Mexico City. And the title of his talk is The Influence of Language on the Way We Think. Ricardo, welcome.
Thank you very much, Thom. Hi, nice to meet you all. This is my first Congress, and I am excited to be with you. I see that you are very passionate people, and that cheers me up. So I will share my screen. I have prepared a small presentation. Okay, you can see my screen. Yeah, right. So let's start with a story about the power of language. So if you are from USA, maybe you know this story about David Goggins. In the early 80s, there was a young boy called David living in a family with an abusive father. His father made his family work for him at his business at night. So David, who was 6 at that time, barely had time to sleep. So he spent a lot of time sleeping in school. This affected David's academic performance and even his learning skills. He was not able to pay attention or even retain knowledge in his mind. For that reason, David started to cheat in order to pass exams. In college, he gained friends who were a bad influence for him, and he started going to the wrong path, failing in school and not even attending it. He faked his grades, so her mother did not notice it, until one day, her mother told David that the school had sent her a letter telling her about all of his bad performance. That was the first time David faced the mirror, realized he did not like what he saw, and started lecturing himself, reprogramming his mind. He remembered he had the dream to become part of the Air Force and started studying harder than ever for this exam, preparing himself until finally he entered at 19 years old. So 4 years later, after he was discharged, he found himself working as a pest controller for restaurants at night. feeling miserable in life and his marriage. And it happened again. He talked again to himself and decided he would enter the Navy SEALs. He got in, time passed, and now he has become one of the toughest men in the world, being the only member of the US Armed Forces to complete SEAL training, US Army Ranger School, and Air Force Tactical Air Controller training. So in this story, we can see how language influences our thought, but it also raises another question. Does thought influences language, or language influences thought? To answer this question, first, we need to understand what language is. According to Oxford Dictionary, language is the principal method of human communication, consisting of words used in a structured and conventional way and conveyed by speech, writing, or gesture. I agree with this definition, but I will also add another important characteristic of language, that it can refer to abstract concepts. That is, not only through language can we speak about the colors we see or about the physical things that surround us, such as a table, a chair, or a computer. We can also talk about faith, God, or mathematics. Language has allowed man to communicate to other beings like him, learn and get to know the world that surrounds him. In this way, humans have been able to develop their rationality, cognition, and culture. This can be seen with the evolution that human beings have had in the creation of symbols, the pictograms, ideograms, the writing in its different phases until it reached the phonetic alphabet. It is true that in the beginning of time, our cognitive power was the one who created language, but now it seems that language is helping us to enhance cognition. Bowerman and Levinson said, language invades our thinking because languages are good to think with. Language is so important to mankind that even humans have been defined as beings who talk, and in that sense, the reference has to do not only with written or spoken language, but also with the fact that man can communicate in several ways with different symbols. So language influences thought, but does each language influences thought the same way, or each language influences thought differently? To answer this question, we need to talk about Benjamin Lee Whorf, who proposed that categories and distinctions of each language give us a way of perceiving, analyzing, and acting in the world. As much as languages differ, the speakers too should differ in how they perceive and act in objectively similar situations. For example, based on his observation that the Inuit tribe had different terms for snow, he thought that Eskimos had a better understanding or more refined perception of snow, thanks to the fact that they had different ways to describe it. Other examples in more familiar languages are in the English language. There are two ways to indicate a person is alone: by empowering them, solitude, and by giving them a negative view, loneliness. In Spanish, there is only one word, soledad. But in Spanish, there are several ways to say I love you, depending if you are telling it to a friend, te quiero, or a spouse, te amo. So is it that depending on the language you speak, you can love in more ways than other people? Maybe this is a bit exaggerated, but the truth is that the way people from diverse countries behave is very different when talking about emotions, attitudes, etc. Does language determine or conditions them to be the way they are? Several studies showed a lot of similarity in color memory among speakers of different languages, but research into how people conceptualize abstract domains like time has shown differences between different languages. Maybe this is because language has more power influencing thought in more abstract topics that are not so reliant on sensory experiences. Other examples of the way language impacts our thought are memory. For example, with the following list of numbers, 4, 8, 5, 3976. If you speak English, you have about a 50% chance of remembering the sequence. If you are Chinese, it's almost certain you can get it right every time. According to Stanislas Dehaene, this is probably because as human beings, we save digits in a memory loop that lasts just a couple of seconds, and Chinese speakers memorize that list correctly because their language allows them to fit all those 7 numbers into 2 seconds. Chinese words are very brief. Most of them can be said in less than 1/4 of a second. For example, 4 is si, 7 is he. The English equivalents are, well, 4 and 7, right? So they take more time to be pronounced, about 1/3 of a second. Not only numbers can be remembered, but also, for example, stories like the Iliad and the Odyssey, which were transmitted for generations as an oral song or poem. Another example is object attributes. Boroditsky and many philosophers through history have thought that grammatical gender influences the way people think about inanimate objects. For example, if the word for son is masculine in a language, one might try to describe it in terms of what is perceived as stereotypically masculine properties like powerful and threatening. If the word for son is feminine, one might focus on its warming and nourishing qualities. The same goes for bridges, for example, for languages who say bridge is masculine, maybe they will say they are strong, they are powerful, but if it's feminine, maybe they are going to talk about how beautiful is it, etc. With all this, we can now see how language is a great tool for our mind. So now the question for all of us is how we can consciously take advantage of language to enhance our brain, improve our way to learn, memorize better, and become better human beings. The author Stephen R. Covey, in his book of the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, stated that one of the first things to do to be effective is to change your language. Don't say, I don't have time for this. I need to do that. Say the truth. I don't want to do this. I will do that simply because I want to. Start being responsible for the things you do and the things you don't do by simply saying it. Maybe this could be the beginning to reprogram your way of thinking. Thank you very much.
Oh, great. Thank you very much. And thank you for being more than on time. I think I can. There we go. We're back. All right. Yeah. Thanks so much. And welcome aboard.
Thank you very much.
Presentation. Yeah. Our second presenter has the wonderful, I guess we all wish that we could be independently wealthy and an independent scholar, but Carmine Giordano from here in the US is going to present his paper entitled A General Semantics Perspective on Language and Reality, Implications for Therapy. Carmine, take it away. You need to unmute.
Can you hear me now? Yeah?
Yes. Thanks.
Okay, great. First of all, thanks, Lance. Thanks, Thom. Thanks, everyone, for allowing me the opportunity to participate in this. My own background, I'm a graduate of a Freudian Psychoanalytic Institute, the National Psychological Association for Psychoanalysis, and I'm a certified psychoanalyst from the accrediting organization, the National Association for the Advancement of Psychoanalysis, just to give a little bit of support for having some of the experience about what I'm going to speak. My topic today is the implications of semantics for the therapist, specifically the psychoanalytic therapist. From the perspective of general semantics, a fundamental problem in human communication is the discrepancy between the structure of man's verbal systems and the structure of the empirical world. To state it simply, in relation to objects, experiences, or events, words are not themselves the realities to which they refer. Rather, they are personalized oral or written representation of those realities, maps of those territories. Moreover, the totality of any reality is never directly accessible. Consequently, any communicated observation necessarily represents a partial statement, an abstraction from all that is actually out there. Additionally, the empirical world does not remain static, but changes continuously at all levels. From this perspective, language communication for the general semanticists remains at best an exchange of subjective terms about continuously altering realities, which are always only partially observed. Korzybski postulates that this fundamental problem of language is overlooked in most communications because of the prevailing Aristotelian system of logic, which structures thought and speech in our society. The axioms of that system are contained in the well-known laws of thought, the law of identity, whatever is, the law of contradiction, nothing can both be and not be, and the law of excluded third, everything must either be or not be. As premises, these axioms immediately distort perception. Identity, absolute sameness in all respects, is assumed as an empirical principle, while partial identity is seen as self-contradictory. Observed realities are languaged as always black or white with no possibility of variance. The Aristotelian tendency to ascribe perceived qualities as inherent in nature presents an additional complication. The subject-predicate structure of language, particularly involving the verb to be, falsifies conclusions. When something is said to have a particular quality, the rose is red, or to be in a specific way, the rose is a flower, an assumption is being made that the properties or qualities involved actually exist out there in nature, and that the entities examined are inexorably this or that. Whereas, Korzybski points out, these qualities and properties are actually manufactured in our nervous system, which also do the classifying. The perpetuation of such projections, concludes Korzybski, tends to keep mankind on the archaic levels of anthropomorphism and animism in their evaluation of their surroundings and themselves. Now, these basic observations from general semantics are immediately useful to the psychoanalytic therapist. The semantic emphasis on subjectivity of language is of crucial importance to a therapeutic process which traditionally employs free association as a major technique, a process that encourages patients to re-experience and verbalize earlier stages of communication where the initial misperceptions and frustrations which bring them into therapy occurred. The possibility always remains that the therapist will decode a patient's struggling and ambiguous and idiosyncratically coded communication according to the therapist's own sophisticated linguistic devices and use their own maps to explore the patient's unique territory. Therapists must keep in mind that the idiomatic and changing reality of the patient's experiences will never be directly accessible to the analyst, or for that matter, even retrospectively to the patient. And that at best, what will be received are the patient's filtered verbal representations of portions of that experience. Accordingly, therapists must be keenly attentive to the phonetic, grammatical, semantic, intonational peculiarities of that experience as it is translated to the patient's communication. Consistent with general semantics perspective, therapists should be aware that their assessments and interpretations of patients' experiences are based on the therapist's prior maps, as well as those of other theoreticians. These maps include diagnostic categories, models of the mind, disciplines and techniques. For example, Freudian, Kleinian, self-psychological, ego-psychological, object-relational, intersubjective, relational, terms which are rife in the psychoanalytic world. When therapists use psychoanalytic, psychological, and psychiatric concepts and diagnostic categories, for example, neurosis, borderline condition, narcissistic rage, transmuting internalizations, they must keep in mind that they are using language maps to refer to observed or reported experiences, which are themselves abstracts of total realities, and not treat the concepts and category words as though they actually referred to some qualities inherent to the patient. From a general semantics perspective, patients are not static configurations with a given and permanently fixed operative history, but beings in process and highly interdependent with other structures. The assessment of the patient and the direction of the therapy should not blindly accommodate prior maps, but rather the patient's data and the specifics of the person-to-person relationship should be examined as unique territory requiring new cartography, sort of like Lewis and Clark exploring the Northwest, having to make up terms and discover principles that had not been in nature that they hadn't observed before. Accordingly, it would make general semantic sense that the psychoanalytic language on an individual and academic basis be free from blind adherence to any traditional or favored model and be in a continual state of examination, refinement, and revision. Of the current psychoanalytic theorists who intuitively understand and apply general semantic principles, which distinguish perception, reality, and language, people such as Richard Stollerow, Stephen Mitchell, Stephen Kuchuk, are among several who have come closest to their intersubjective and relational perspectives, to offering a psychoanalytic bridge to the application of general semantics insight to theory and practice. One group of theorists, or theory, called the intersubjective theory, again, names, labels, for instance, differs from other psychoanalytic theories in that it does not posit particular psychological contents that are presumed to be universally salient in personality development and in pathogenesis. It is a process theory offering broad methodological and epistemological principles for investigating different psychoanalytic theories by contextualizing them. From an intersubjective perspective, that way of looking at things, the content themes of various metapsychological doctrines, views of the structure of the psyche. For example, Freud's Oedipus complex, Klein, another name in the fields, paranoid, schizoid, and depressive positions, Kohut's mirroring, idealizing, and twinship longings, and the like, can be de-absolutized, de-universalized, and recognized as powerful metaphors and imagery that may become salient in the subjective worlds of some people under particular intersubjective circumstances. Some specific operating principles from these theorists that reflect a general semantics perspective include we recognize that our present understanding of anything or anyone is only a perspective within a horizon inevitably limited by the historicity of our own organized and organizing experience. It reminds me of this morning session where Mr. Dawes said that our own limits limit what we know out there. It doesn't mean that what's out there is limited. Another concept of this particular school that is very insightful in terms of general semantics is we criticize the very concept of technique in psychoanalysis as relying on an assumption that one isolated mind, the analyst, is supposed to do something to another isolated mind, the patient. In a paradigmatic shift from traditional founding or Freudian theory, the most recent theorists who label themselves relational theorists and psychotherapists see mind as being shaped by and inevitably embedded within a matrix of relationships rather than as solely a derivative of sexual and aggressive drives or a conglomeration of physically based urges seeking release, which is the traditional psychoanalytic model. As such, the traditional analytic stance of remaining hidden and set and silent, serving as a blank screen upon which the patient's inner drives and unconscious phenomena project themselves, has been superseded by one in which patients are allowed to experience and react to the analyst's subjectivities, that is, his or her biases, moods, psychology, as they are disclosed judiciously in the service of the treatment. Clinical psychology, all of these current revisions are similar in general semantics to attacking the allness view of the world, and also allow that after everything is said and done, everything has been looked at, there's more to be looked at and more to be said and done. One problem for the general public is that Freudian psychoanalysis is seen as psychoanalysis. It's what's used, what was used for the treatment of dreams for the early movies of the 20s and the 30s, and for many non-analytic people, not in that world. The thought is that is what psychoanalysis is exclusively, and many times it's thrown out as though it's no longer relevant, when actually the theorists have progressed and in effect junked a lot of Freudian thinking and have come up with new models. Clinical psychologist Isabel Caro, who received in 2004 the J. Talbot Winchell Award from the Institute of General Semantics for furthering the work of general semantics, nicely sums up the principles and applications of general semantics most useful for psychoanalysts and other therapists. She says, as therapists, we need to be conscious of the difference in the structure of patients' problems at verbal and nonverbal levels. We must be aware that our theories about sanity and therapy are no more than incomplete accounts, abstractions made from a world richer and in process. We must be conscious that the structure of our knowledge processes involves a specific set of relations that impinge on us. We must realize that in therapy, we deal with inferences by inferential means, never with pure facts. As she quotes Korzybski, there are no facts free from doctrine. And we must remain aware, she says, that this situation is unavoidable in terms of human knowledge. That is, the best we can do is to work at structurally adjusting our experiences in therapy. This will, she says, result, I think, in therapists expanding the limits of their knowledge using their self-reflexive and meta-communicative processes. In his brilliant review, Levels of Knowing and Existence, Harry Weinberg, a while ago, posited a complementary semantotherapy, which I find very useful and a great adjunct to psychoanalysis. His semantotherapy, as he calls it, primarily concerns itself with changing those patterns of behavior that are open to conscious control and change. The basic postulate of semantotherapy is that an organism acts as a whole at a given date in a given environment. Whatever affects one part of the organism affects all of it. Separating mind-body dynamics or psyche dynamics, id, ego, superego, endows them with the spurious independent existence. We indulge ourselves in allegorical imagery and figures of speech about strife between them. We realize that unconscious factors may play a large part in behavior. But, he says, he writes, they are not the only ones. And here I think is his wonderful contribution that general semantics makes to psychotherapy, any psychotherapy, that maybe posits unconscious dynamics, whatever they are. He says, by reducing the misevaluations open to conscious control, general semantic principles, the application of general semantic principles, we lessen the stress upon the organism and thereby keep from stirring up unconscious stimuli, unconscious in quotes. By controlling the secondary symptoms, we keep them from reinforcing the primary ones. And this in turn, over a long period of time, greatly reduces the potency of the unconscious patterns of misevaluation. And I think that's a great summation of the wonderful application of general semantic principles to reinforce on a conscious level the patient's world and assessment, and hoping that that will reduce some of the stress of all those factors that bring him or her into therapy that the person is not aware of, and that in the course of the treatment come up and are looked at, and the patients are assisted to deal with them and resolve issues that still linger. And in psychoanalysis, of course, the particular mode of that treatment is that the analyst looks for the patient to bring into their relationship the same dynamics, positive and negative, that occur in his or her world out there, which gives them the opportunity to look closely at how the patient functions in the world. And in current therapy, the analyst no longer remains silent, but is more and more present as an interacting human being. And the thought is that comprehensively, that's a more of a healing factor than existed before in psychoanalysis. And that I think is what I those insights are what I like to share. And I've had this paper published in the Psychoanalytic Journal of the National Association for the Advancement of Psychoanalysis by way of sharing with fellow analysts the wonderful positive reinforcement that general semantics allows them. Thank you very much.
And thank you.
Okay.
All right. Moving along, and we're looking okay on time with respect to the original schedule, so thank you all. Our next presenter is Gina Valente from the Universidad Nacional de Rosario in, I guess it's Buenos Aires, Argentina. Gina is a professor on the Faculty of Humanities and Arts, and is also the founder and director of the 404 International Festival of Art and Technology, which has been presented in 9 countries since 2004 and is the oldest festival of its kind in Argentina. Gina, the floor or the Zoom room is yours.
Hello. Thank you, Thom, and thank you, Strate, for inviting me. Nice to meet you all. My relationship with arts began before I noticed. I started composing music and writing poetry since childhood. By the beginning of the millennium, I created the 404 International Festival of Art and Technology, a nonprofit project that has been presented during 19 years in 12 countries so far. I'm currently full professor at the Faculty of Humanities and Arts in Argentina, and some of the thoughts I will share with you today are part of my PhD thesis on art, technology, and education. Marshall McLuhan's legacy hasn't been fully comprehended yet. His books are usually taught at the Science of Communication career, where some of his ideas are still not convenient. When I began to read his thoughts, I decided to spread them among art students and teachers who enjoy the way in which he provokes, shares, and challenges their intuitions. Human beings are like stones. We can stay for thousands of years in the same place until something unpredictable makes us move. Some of us crash, some of us remain. Some of us break into invisible particles until we breathe them and they become part of us again. But the little rocks are the ones that when you throw them into a cliff could cause an avalanche. We are now living in a discouraged age where it is supposed that everything has been done. We have been created, we have been explained, and we are entertained. Even Narcissus encountered his reflection in a poetic way. We don't. We did fulfill others' fictions, and it is costing our lives. Neither rebels nor revealed, we are contemporary myths, unread, untold, locked by our passwords. It's the unnamed what escapes from predictions and control and make possible the unexpected. Deep inside, human beings refuse to fully accept the terms and conditions of the established pacts because it's known how simulacrums work, and we are all part of them. In those interstices, art can be the spark that lights the fire. So many times, arts fight in the cultural battlefields. But while new battles become progressively invisible, the notion of artist also does. Winners and losers are the achievement of a main structure that wants to conquer a land inside of us. They own many territories so far. It is uncountable. capitalism is turning back into feudalism. I wonder why we don't want to notice it. I guess that it works like a large-scale domino effect where nobody wants to knock down any piece because that single piece will knock down all the others. What's the future of turning the debate table upside down? Lagged lives seeking to be blinded. There is a fear that makes us hold what we can get. These toxic landscapes turn humans into users. Frequently, artists are said to be dreamers, but this word does not always have a positive connotation because those who destroy the world also dream. And most of the time, their dreams come true because they have the means to make them happen. When they dream, our world has nightmares. It is not important to transform things when the situation is given for them to change. When everything is given for them to change, it is because the system itself needs that to happen. The system has multiple agendas, and art is definitely part of them. We are talking about cultural programming. Music has always been an artistic expression under surveillance because it can immediately modify our reactions. On the other hand, through advertising and the most popular images, the system has perpetuated itself in our eyes. Cultural battles are neutralized when their goal is victory. When it matters to win, any battle ends. To fight expecting others to lose is the same as losing. It's the way in which the system functions. No matter what the results are, it always fights to win. That's why fighting the battle, assuming that you are going to lose, requires a major strength. Fighting without hope, but with conviction, even knowing that you might not live to see the changes, is what today turns art into a counter environment. McLuhan referred to artists as those who seek new pattern recognition. To do so, we must take a commitment. There shouldn't be a priority space, subject, or profession over another. For the human artist, everything is important and new because nothing has been seen and thought enough. Contemplating with the same level of importance all the spaces, both the large facades and their interstices, is a way of avoiding the trap that the system sets for us, which works like a camera, focusing and blurring in pursuit of its benefit. Marshall said, "If it is true that the artist has the power to foresee and avoid the consequences of technological traumas, then what are we going to think of the world and the bureaucracy of art appreciation? Wouldn't it suddenly come to resemble a conspiracy that make the artist a braggart, a frivolous, or a muscle relaxer? The rhizomatic potential of our thoughts is subdued by the vibrant undulation of the environments in which we live immersed. I imagine art as a Trojan horse, as a circuit breaker that can interrupt the flux which media orchestrates to manage our perception of space and time and our perception about us and the others. I believe that art is the expressive reaction to an oppressive system. But when we are galvanized enough and stop noticing oppression, art becomes a therapeutic practice of evasion. Either art questions or is condescending. The position that each society assigns to art reveals the characteristics of its citizens. In the contemporary world, spectacle and entertainment have absorbed almost all forms of art. When everything is artistic, art gets dissolved. Very few students finish high school having seen an artwork that has subverted their status in some way, that has broadened their minds beyond mainstream formats. Whoever was born in the 21st century has surely came across the sceneries proposed by the cultural industries. While according to McLuhan, before the 20th century, artists and creators of counter-environments were associated with the notion of criminals. Later, they were related to the notion of insanity, and currently they are synonymous with business and success, depending on the number of followers. When our personal imaginary can't step out of the collective imaginary and collective becomes corporate, it is necessary to visualize some indication that returns us to the exclusive task of not belonging. But our imagination does not always complete to validate. Sometimes it can also get in the way. As Montaigne wrote in the 16th century, a robust imagination generates events by itself. For most of the members of our society, lockdown was a way to perceive that space and time were broken, which was already happening before the pandemic, and it still goes on, despite of the efforts to rebuild the structures that led us to the previous settings. What was reset and what was format when we were stuck on the other side of the screens? Why did we miss belonging to a system that turns its back on us? Uncertainties and panic might cause that. For most people, the very idea of transforming the conditions of the world and creating new paths that can change our lives sounds provocative. But when that possibility becomes real, it can be terrifying. Even those who wanted to change the game are dealing the same cards, and we continue to play by the same rules. When I met new people using the masks, facial expressions were cropped like a failed render. The lack of information in their faces encouraged me to imagine the rest, like a children's book where you have to complete a figure that only shows the top part by default. It hints that meeting others can always be part of a creative process. When masks were removed, they became strangers again. There was too much information that I didn't know how to deal with. We are used to read faces as if they were a system itself. We read them as a unity, and we give to that unity a purpose, like the signs on a road. Often, when someone takes off the mask, it is disappointing to know that our imagination can't compete with mirrors. Now, Narcissus' reflection has exploded into multiple pieces. What are we going to do with the broken parts? I don't think that art is what completes us, but through which we can think the incomplete. And those who control the system by shaping our perception are the ones who know it best. The real artwork lives in each one of us. Thank you all.
All right. And thank you. So it is it's always fun to do this. It is fun to share ideas and new ideas and to learn from our colleagues. But I've got to say that I'm going to have the most fun that I'm going to have today reading the title of the next presentation, which is by Marty Levinson, who is the past president of the Institute of General Semantics, the book review editor for our journal, etc., and Hail Fellow, well met for a long time. And the title of his talk is What the Fuck? Examining an Obscene Term.
Well done, Thom. And thank you. And I want to thank Lance for organizing what has been for me a highly interesting and instructive conference. These conferences are not easy to organize. I've organized a bunch myself. The behind the scenes work is difficult, and Lance has done it, so thank you. So let me begin, and I'll enjoy reading the title too. What the Fuck? Examining an Obscene Term. In 1934, Alan Walker Reed, an etymologist, English professor, and good friend of the Institute of General Semantics, published a 15-page groundbreaking article on taboo language titled An Obscenity Symbol in the journal American Speech. Due to the linguistic mores of the times, he did not spell out the symbol's name or use the conventions, the F word, F asterisk asterisk K or FM-K. Instead, he alluded to it as this word, our word, and the word that has the deepest stigma of any in the English language. Today, he would have simply written, fuck. Our word first appeared in 1528 in a manuscript of the Latin orator Cicero. Reading through the monastery copy of De Officiis, an anonymous monk wrote in the margins of the text, O.D. fucking abbot. It is not known whether fucking referred to the abbot having sex or with an intensifier. But the cleric was careful not to write the word damned, which is what the letter D stood for. In the 16th century, blasphemy trumped sexual allusions with respect to what was considered truly obscene. In 1598, John Florio published A World of Words, an Italian-English dictionary whose aim was to define words in Italian and English as they were actually spoken. It is awash in fucks. Foteri is defined as to jape, to sar, to fuck, to swive, to occupy. Fortice includes the terms a woman fucker and a swiver. And fortatori is to make the is the male counterpart of fortice. While fuck appeared in print in the 16th century, it was used in common speech before then. In 1671, fuck was given a dictionary entry in its proper alphabetical place in Thomas Henshaw's Etymologicon Linguae Angelicanae. Fuck also appeared in Nathaniel Bailey's Universal Etymological English Dictionary in 1721 and John Ash's New and Complete Dictionary of the English Language in 1775. Samuel Johnson omitted fuck from his highly influential Dictionary of the English Language in 1755. Johnson refused to countenance the inclusion of any language that he could not repeat in genteel society. Many of the new dictionaries in the middle and latter parts of the 18th century were produced for use in schools, and fuck was omitted from them over concerns of corrupting young minds. In the 19th century, Johnson's omission of the word in his dictionary set the tone for dictionary writers such as Noah Webster, who excluded fuck in his dictionaries of 1806, 1807, 1817, 1828, and 1841, and Sir James Murray, editor of the Oxford English Dictionary, who in 1898 omitted fuck in the OED. The 1873 Comstock Act, which prohibited the mailing of obscene, lewd, or lascivious material, also limited the use of fuck in print. The copious use of fuck by soldiers during World War I, swearing was commonplace for doughboys as their seclusion from polite society meant there was no one around to reproach them for speaking in this manner, made it possible for the word to return to the printed page. After the war, fuck appeared in Ulysses and Lady Chatterley's Lover, which caused those books to be frequently banned and confiscated by government authorities, including the U.S. Postal Service. Ulysses was ruled permissible in 1933, that's 11 years after it was published, and the decision was upheld the following year. The course did not clear Lady Chatterley's Lover, which was originally published in 1928, until 1959 in the United States and 1960 in England. In November 1960, when the publisher put the book out for sale, the entire print run of 200,000 copies sold out on the first day. The lucky author. From privates to the top brass, fuck was used by millions of men in uniform during World War II. It served as a stand-in while thinking for a more suitable word, but it was more often employed as an expletive. Fuck's pell-mell use during the war led it to lose some of its stigma, but among a number of civilians, it still remained a taboo word. In 1948, when Norman Mailer published The Naked and the Dead, a gritty novel that depicts the experiences of a platoon during World War II, he was forced to substitute the word fug, F-U-G, for fuck. And in the 1957 musical West Side Story, Stephen Sondheim went with buggin'. So the lyric is, the Jets won who best every last buggin' gang on the whole buggin' street. And the lyric G Officer Krupke, krupp you. In the 1950s and 1960s, fuck was frequently printed in full in mainstream fiction and nonfiction. James Jones used it 50 times in his 1951 National Book Winning Award novel From Here to Eternity, and J.D. Salinger utilized it in Catcher in the Rye. John O'Hara in 10 North Frederick used it in 1955, Allen Ginsberg in the poem Howell in 1956, and many other writers also began to incorporate the term in their manuscripts. The protest era of the 1960s led to greater uses and acceptance of the word. It was uttered once in the film Vapor, 1965, and in two Andy Warhol films, Poor Little Rich Girl, 1965, and My Hustler, 1965. In 1970, Robert Altman's R-rated black comedy MASH became the first major film to use fuck. The MPAA rating system assigns a PG-13 rating if a film contains the word. The R rating is normally required if the film contains two utterances of the word in a sexual context. An important victory for breaking fuck's taboo came in Cohen versus California, 1971. A Supreme Court case that involved a Vietnam War protester who wore a jacket bearing the phrase, fuck the draft, in the public corridors of a California courthouse. The court ruled that the protester could not be criminally prosecuted for a public display of the word fuck, as it did not fall into other categories of proscribed speech, such as fighting words or obscenity. Shortly thereafter, the Supreme Court, in the case of FCC versus Pacifica Foundation, 1978, created a category of lesser protected speech for the term fuck, and that was indecency. The case involved the airing of comedian George Carlin's now famous monologue, 50 Words, which included fuck and motherfucker, on the radio. An action the Federal Communications Commission said it could weigh in on based upon its statutory authority to regulate and restrict, in quotes, any obscene, indecent, or profane language. The Supreme Court agreed with the FCC, ruling that the agency could impose administrative sanctions on broadcasters that allowed the transmission of offensive language that was indecent. The use of the word fuck increased in the 1980s and 1990s. In 1998, the New York Times printed the word in full as part of their commitment to publishing the Starr Report. Quote, Ms. Lewinsky said she wanted two things from the president. The first was contrition. He needed to acknowledge that he helped fuck up my life, end quote. Fuck is not that widely used in politics, and its use sometimes promotes controversy. Some examples of its use in the political arena include the following. In June 2004, Vice President Cheney told Democratic Senator Patrick Leahy, go fuck yourself. On March 23, 2010, Vice President Joe Biden whispered to President Barack Obama that this is a big fucking deal. That's referring to the U.S. healthcare reform bill. In 2021, "Let's go Brandon" became a political slogan and internet meme as a euphemism for "fuck Joe Biden." Fuck's appearance in music goes back a ways. Louise Brogan's Dirty Blues recording of Shave 'Em Dry made use of the word with lyrics such as, "I fucked all night and the night before, baby, and I feel like I want to fuck some more," and gave some insight into what was actually being sung in clubs at the time. Today's use of fuck in music is ubiquitous, with hip hop and heavy metal groups the most profane. Song titles with the word fuck in them include "Fuck the Police" by NWA, "Nazi Punks Fuck Off" by the Dead Kennedys, and "Fuck the Pain Away" by Peaches. Fuck has become a versatile word that can be grammatically employed as a verb, "they fuck all the time," a noun, "you're such a fuck," pronoun, "hey, fuckface," adverb, "he fucking screamed as loud as he could," conjunction, "I went swimming, fuck the cold," as in I went swimming despite the cold, interjection, "fuck, I hit my elbow." Fuck also has a wide variety of meanings, and I'll just give you some of them. Aggression, "fuck you." Apathy, "who gives a fuck?" Confusion, "what the fuck?" Despair, "fucked again." Fraud, "I got fucked." Greetings, "how the fuck are you?" Ignorance, "how the fuck do I know?" Incompetence, "he's a fuck up." Laziness, "he's a fuck off." Wonder, "how the fuck did you do that?" I could go on, and I did in a poem I wrote that actually motivated this article. And fuck is a component of many acronyms, among them snafu, situation normal, all fucked up. FUBAR, fucked up beyond all recognition. WTF, what the fuck. STFU, shut the fuck up. BAMF, badass motherfucker. OMFG, oh my fucking God. Fuck is clearly a resilient word, but its saturation and overuse is probably diminishing its offensiveness. To quote the linguist Ruth Wangener, nowadays it takes more fucks to achieve what one lone fuck would have achieved 10 years ago. Richard Dooling, the author of Blue Streak, Swearing, Free Speech and Sexual Harassment, also note that fuck has lost its position as the king of offensive terms, in quotes. For centuries, fuck was the most objectionable word in the English language, but now nigger and cunt are probably tied for that distinction, and fuck has at long last stepped down. Alan Walker Reed, writing about why fuck was considered so obscene and carried such a great stigma, argued it was partly because of the, in quotes, fearful thrill, in end quotes, it gave to people from, quotes, seeing, doing, or speaking the forbidden, end quotes. As the use of the word has become more prevalent in society, that, in quotes, fearful thrill and fuck's status as a major obscenity has lessened. This is understandable as the shelf life of words considered profane typically diminishes over time. Damn and hell held sway as horrible obscenities in the 16th century. Today, as the linguist John McWhorter notes, they're hardly the kind of words that leave you looking around to see if anyone else has heard. George Carlin's take on profanity was that, in quotes, these words have no power. We give them power by refusing to be free and easy with them. We give them power over us. They really in themselves have no power, end quotes. A general semanticist might say the meaning of words is not in words, it's in people. Fuck's meaning has clearly morphed quite a bit since Alan Walker Reed wrote about, in quotes, our word in 1934. It is no longer, in quotes, the word that has the deepest stigma of any in the English language, end quotes. That distinguish seems to have gone to the N-word. Fuck instead has become a multi-purpose term with expansive power, not found in the C word or the N-word, as these terms specifically target gender and race. Fuck is an equal opportunity pejorative for those who care to use it. Alan Walker Reed felt he could not write fuck in a scholarly article discussing that word. That constraint no longer holds, as is evidenced by numerous scholarly treatises where the word now appears. Those treatises support the general semantic notion that the only thing permanent in life is change. Thank you.
And thank you. Marty, before we talk about publishing this and et cetera, I just want to make one minor correction. The Carlin case wasn't 50 words. It was 7 words you can't say on television.
That was the Carlin case?
The Carlin case, right. The 7 words, WBAI played the bit that was from his album Class Clown. It was the 7 words you can't say on television.
I'll look that up. I'll take it on the revisement, but okay, thank you. I'll demur for now, but I hear what you're saying.
In the meantime, thank you to all the presenters on this session. And we have a good deal of time left for questions, comments, and please use the raise your hand function because there are about 50 participants still here and I can only see the group that's on the one screen.
I just want to throw out that if you want to hear more people saying fuck or read about it, John McWhorter's book won the Hayakawa Prize this past year, and we had a panel discussion just in April with it. I put the link for that in the chat.
Yeah, thanks. Licia. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Thom. I would like to thank actually all the presenters. So all the presentations were absolutely unbelievable. So, and I just have a couple of questions and a couple of comments. So my first question goes to Ricardo and actually the first presentation about how language shapes the way we think. So immediately when I just heard the title of the presentation and actually listened to the presentation, what it evoked in my mind is actually the book, which is classical, I think, cognitive linguistics. And you've mentioned, for example, Lera Boroditsky, who is she's a cognitive philosopher, yeah, etc. So the book, which is entitled like The Way We Think, Conceptual Blending and the Hidden Complexities of the Mind by Gilles Fauconnier and Mark Turner, right, where they developed this theory of conceptual blending. And actually in this theory, it's both how the mind works, right, and how it shapes language, let's say so, and vice versa, right, how language shapes mind. So is this book inspired you for this research and presentation, etc., or no? Just this kind of question.
I really hadn't heard of that book before, but now I have written it, so I will read it. I was inspired by a TED talk about how language influences, and by all that the research this woman did. So that was the inspiration for me.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, so it's classical, so that's why. Yeah, and I'm also familiar with this TED talk, and thank you for your presentation. It was really great. Yeah. Okay, and my second question, if I may, please, to Gina. So thank you really for your presentation, because actually I focus on various representations of art and art forms, etc., and in pandemic in particular. And I absolutely support all your claims, and so actually the statements of all the scholars who you cited as well. And of course, we know very well that poetry, it has always had, and it will always have this social function, right? And we turn to poetry in the times of need, right? And really, what you mentioned is that poetry, right? It's a kind of not poetry, but art. I'm sorry. Yeah, it's just an expressive reaction to an oppressive system, right? And at the same time, it can be a therapeutic system as well. So, but actually, my question is, you define art as counter environments during lockdown. So my question is, what do you mean by art as counter environment in this case? Is it like kind of opposed to some other environments? And why then you define it as counter environment?
Hello, Lesia or Lisha. I'm not sure.
Yeah,
Nice to
that's
meet you.
me.
Thank you for your
Nice to meet
comments.
you.
As regard of arts, it depends on what's the point of view of each one of us, because there is not an arts definition, but I know what is for me, according to my experience. It's not my idea to make a definition of what art is. But as I said, I think that the notion of art nowadays has been absorbed by the industries. So it's very difficult to find that an artist can affect or make some change inside the system, because most of today's artists in general, they want to belong to the system. So it's very difficult to change something that you already look with those eyes, you know. So I think it's very difficult to find art as a resistant or as something that can transform the environments. So yes, as a counter environment, not always. I don't think art is always function as a counter environment. Sometimes it's the environment itself, the dominant substance. It's also part of art. So that's why I presented my position, because when I started to make 404, I learned watching the artworks. And I met wonderful artists that do criticize the system, and they do it in such a creative way that the system itself wonders how can someone be in opposition, but at the same time to be fascinating enough for all the people. So that's why I think art as a Trojan horse. Sometimes when we deal with art and technology, we are dealing with two different worlds. Sometimes technology used to work on the opposite direction. So when I work with art and technology, I focus on the anchor. To me, that's the connector and the area that separates both terms and what relates them. So I focus on that part more than art and more than technology, because I'm not an enthusiastic of technology itself, let's say.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Sorry, I just missed in that last part. You focus on the
ampere.
The end.
How do you say it? The ampere. The connector, you know, and art and technology. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. The connector is what connects them and what separates them. Yes.
Thanks. Carmine.
Yeah, Martin, and with everybody, wanted to share an experience I had, you know, with the word fuck. You know, I early in my career, I was a teacher at John Dewey High School in Brooklyn. And one of the students there was Donald Margulies, who won the Pulitzer Prize for Dinner with Friends and Collected Stories. And he had submitted a short story to the student magazine. And in it, in the story, a young man confronted his father, and he said to his father, "Fuck you." And what happened is the magazine the principal got word of it. The magazine was taken out of circulation. And what the students did, they went to the federal court under Judge Weinstein, and they had a case, Margulies and Coppell versus the Board of Education. And I was one of the people that was called in. I was the magazine, the supervisor, you know, in the school. And I said to Judge Weinstein, apropos of Martin, what you were saying, I said, you know, by the way, the charge was of disseminating obscenity. You know, and I thought to myself, well, that's the end of my career, you know. And I'm going to be one of these police files, you know, from here on in. So I said to him, I said, you know, to the judge, I said, Judge, you know, in context, which I think Martin, you were bringing up, I said, this was not an obscenity. You know, if you define it as, you know, having sexual component. I said it was an expletive, what you said, Martin. I said in context, it was not obscene. And so it can't be really, it's the basis of the charge it doesn't count here. Anyway, the judge, among other factors, the judge did rule in our favor, and he requoted me, and then it became a national law, if I have the right word, that allowed the use of that word in high school publications if in other than a sexual context. So I just thought you might share that with you.
Well, thank you. Interesting. It's a precedent, but yeah, thank you. Fascinating.
Yeah.
Thom, I think you're muted.
Thom.
I see Sue has her hand up, but Diane has her actual human hand up, so we'll let her go first.
I'm sorry, I can't figure out how to put the hand up. I should know, but I don't know. This is directed to Gina. I don't know that Lance, I'm probably pronouncing it wrong, but there is a writer, it's a long name, Csikszentmihalyi. He writes about creativity. Do you know who I'm talking about?
Yes, Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. It's a Czech.
Yes,
Czech
it's a
writer.
long.
He wrote Flow.
Yes, he writes a lot about creativity, and he underlines the fact that people create generally when they want to escape their environment. It takes them to another world. In fact, I'm going to talk again about Holocaust. I've done a lot of research into creativity during the Holocaust, and there were a lot of songs written. Songs simply because it's a very short form. You didn't have to write it down, but it was a form of escape. So that idea of changing your environment, of creating art that does that for is not new. It's something that's been studied. Thank you for telling me how to say his name. I just couldn't. I know it was long.
I think it's Csikszentmihalyi, right?
Yeah, it goes on forever.
I think that's right, yeah. Good. If you can spell it, you can come back next week and go for the big prize.
Thank you.
What was the question? No, wasn't.
Actually, it wasn't too much of a question. It was more like a statement. That idea, yes, of creating that counter environment, which not only helps the writer, but helps everybody who sings it or listens to it. It takes them away to a different.
I don't think that. I don't think that creating itself makes it a counter environment. Creation itself, I don't think it's the counter environment. For example, now. Our environment, we were locked on the other side of the screens. I say, even if we were isolated, we were not, because media were our companion during lockdown. So it was a false feeling of being isolated. And that's the difference between this context, what happened now, and what might happen before before we live inside media and media lived inside of us. So that's why I would rethink about what's being isolated right now, what's locked down actually. Thank you.
Now, Susan.
Oh, okay. So of course I want to go back to getting feedback. Okay. So of course I want to go back to Marty's work on the F word. It is 7 dirty words, as Thom said in the
filthy
case.
Words?
But
1973, not filthy words.
The number of offensive words going down is really interesting and has historically been true. But what I also see right now is a rise in the number of words that that are considered, if not legally offensive, under under the current three-part test for offensiveness, they are socially offensive and socially forbidden. And so we talk about the N-word, for example. So I think it's interesting to contrast the fact that historically, I think you're absolutely right, that the number of words always went down. I'm seeing recently the number of words going up. But I don't know if there's a question or a comment that I want to get to, but it seems that at the heart of I think a really, your really rich presentation, I kept wondering, so what is the next step? If the word fuck is so potent in terms of the different perceptions that it can shape and emotions it can express, should we be arguing that there is a right to offend? I'll take that case, a legal right to offend.
Oh, is that the question? Oh, I don't know. I guess my argument wasn't so much legality, was the idea of change. It's going to change anyway. The different terms will change. The F word, Alan Walker Reed couldn't write it in 1934. Today, not only could he write it, he could sing it, he could, dance it, he could do all kinds of things with it. And the N word will change. And I think McWhorter, who wrote this Lance, reference to both, the 9 nasty words, and then there's a good subtitle, I think English in the Gutter or something like that, where McWhorter, and fuck was one of the 9 nasty words, or 8 others. Actually, he really wrote 11. He wrote about 11 nasty words, but so the title is Fake News, but it's kind of fun. But in any event, so you don't know where this goes, but the point from a general semantic standpoint is, nothing is in stone, and the word that we think is the worst word today, will become 50 years from now, it's like damn in hell in the 16th century. My God, they would hang you maybe, or I don't know what they would do, but, now today, as McWhorter says, no big deal. So, things change.
You can practically see it on television here, and the end of the bleep in the middle.
Yeah.
Lance.
Yeah, Carmine, it was interesting to hear you mention the kind of added emphasis on relational aspects. And so I was wondering, because that is in Korzybski, but it really comes out with Gregory Bateson, who was very much influenced by Korzybski in general semantics, and as well as Paul Watzlawick and his colleagues, and actually NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, kind of brings those two strains together, although not in as in-depth a way as either in GS or in therapy. But I was wondering if that was part of the connection for you in understanding the relational aspect of therapy. You have to unmute, I think.
Mute. Unmute.
Still have to unmute.
Okay, yeah. Okay, thank you. Well, not those particular people, but it's the amazing thing is that if there's a piece of fact or reality out there, we all come to it, with different nomenclature. But I recognize it in the world of psychoanalysis, contemporary psychoanalysis. There are a group of theorists who call themselves relational, with distinguishing with relational with a capital R, and not relational with the small r, which preceded them. People like Stephen Mitchell and Stephen Kuchik in the field. So
I bet they got it from Bateson, because Bateson, this was back in in the early post-war era, had this idea of the double-bind theory of schizophrenia, and he was working in psychiatry, also with Jürgen Reusch.
It well may be. I don't know it. As a from research, but I'll look for it. But yeah.
Okay.
I wonder, Tom, I have a question.
Yes, Jackie, go ahead. And this will be the last one. We'll give it a couple minutes.
Okay. What struck me as interesting was with Gina and Carmine, and now you're next to each other on my screen, but when Gina talks about the transformative power of art and the using art as an escape and so forth, and in many ways so did Carmine. And I'm wondering, one or both of you, what is your opinion of art therapy, which is so much in use today? The art therapy as a practice and as a new area of study, it is in the Midwest.
Well, did you want? Yeah. Me?
Either one. I'm just interested, like how two scholars.
I leave that to you. I leave that to you, Carmine.
Well, and I noticed, Carmine, behind you, you have an interesting piece of art, and I'm wondering if you use art as all in your work.
No, I specifically don't. As when I was doing, I'm retired from doing psychoanalytic work, but I do write and I teach and I have workshops in poetry. So what I see in terms of another language for processes which are difficult to express. It's a way of stating them. And that what you need to do is decode them to see what's going on in the interior. It's one way of looking at it. I think art therapy, insofar as it's therapy, you're looking for, again, quote unquote, the unconscious processes. The old ad with the veterinarian said, the animals come in and they can't tell me what's hurting them, that I have to find out somehow, and I think poetry in terms of therapy, I think is a way of finding out what's going on, what went on and what's going on, and would be my way of using, but I haven't used it directly. There's a whole school of training for that. It's a kind of
the university I'm associated with is putting more and more money into the program that we offer, Mount Mary University in Milwaukee, and it seems to be a field that's gaining a lot of notice. And I find not an artist or a therapist, but the connection, I can see it as much as writing poetry. But not everyone can write poetry, but most people can make marks on a paper. But thank you. And thanks to everyone. It was really a wonderful session. And you. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, everyone. Yeah.
Yeah, and with that, I would like to also thank the presenters for a wonderful panel on a Saturday afternoon or Saturday evening or the wee hours of Sunday morning for some of you at this point. So thanks very much. And Lance, I leave it to you.
Okay, and thank you, Tom.
Yeah.
We'll take a short break, and since we'll try to stay relatively on schedule, we'll start up again at 5 minutes after the hour, so just enough time to do what nature requires, and start up at that point.